come to one of those tricky Sundays of the year where we have fairly brutal readings, the slaughter of the innocents. We need to read this very carefully, I think, and who could better be with us than Lisa, Edward, they're related in case you didn't know, Craig Smith, and I just want to flag a couple of things that has got one of the most poignant quotations, I think, in the Bible, the one from Jeremiah, the Rachel weeping. Matthew carefully avoids saying that Jesus is the son of Joseph. I love the way he does that. And also, I think we need to read the question of slaughter and all the things around it very carefully, which I'm sure you three will help us do. Lisa, some background.
Yeah, well, of course, this is a really ghastly reading, and it's really difficult for me to focus on Jesus here because of the devastation of all these little boys. And, I have a grandson who is 2 years old, and I know, though I can hardly bear to think of it, what the effect of his loss would be on his mother and father and all the extended family. These children are presented as a kind of footnote to a much bigger story about the boy who was saved, a kind of collateral damage. But each one of those boys was a cherished child of somebody. Even the word weeping makes me furious. It so diminishes what would have been a lifelong trauma for those parents to have their babies snatched from their arms by soldiers. And I want to be angry with God here. Couldn't he have found a way to rescue all the children? Arranged an earthquake to swallow up all the soldiers sounds like a good idea to me. But the point to make here is that it is Herod who is the one who, in an attempt to find and destroy Jesus, killed those babies. And it's remarkable, really. The Jewish people have been waiting for the Messiah for a very long time. And what was promised when the Messiah came was a new world order centered around Jerusalem. So when the Magi arrived with signs that he could well be here, it should have been a time of amazing rejoicing. But of course, instead of rejoicing, what matters to Herod is his own position and his own power. And he'll kill boys, including the Messiah himself, to hold on to that power. So if ever there was a lesson in how power corrupts, this is it. This reading, I think, should make us angry. This is what the abuse of power looks like.
And Lisa's possibly being too polite to say it, but I think there are ramifications for the current world in which we're living. So let's hear more challenge, because Lisa has just thrown challenge at us, and absolutely rightly, there's little else to do here. Edward, what do you find challenging?
Yeah, there's a few challenges. I think I kind of got up to about 5 challenges and then stopped going up to challenges. I think the main challenge is that it's a very good example of, I guess, an objection that is thrown at Christianity sometimes, which is the problem of evil. This is a situation where God knew this was going to happen, and that he actually, intervened and said, you've got to get out of here. And then either couldn't stop this from happening, which suggests that there's limits on his power, or he chose not to, which suggests that this was all part of a bigger plan. And that puts us in an awkward situation. I guess the other challenge is that, the birth of the Messiah precipitates a mass slaughter of children. And the thing that kind of kicks off the story is something pretty dark. I guess, this is more of an interesting, but it's actually an inversion of Passover. In Passover, the Israelites flee Egypt to the Holy Land, but this time they're going in the opposite direction. So those are my challenges anyway.
That's a lovely point. They're all very telling and painful points in many ways. Craig, what do you find challenging, and welcome for the first time on board?
It's good to be part of you. And I suppose my challenge was you said this would speak to our current world order a bit. And I found myself thinking a challenge for me is sadly that evil happens to good people. And our faith isn't a smoochy Jesus left in a manger, happily ever after faith. And I think it's right to ask in equal measure, where was God in this event? Or, and to take it right down to the current events, where was God in those two air crashes last week, Gaza, Ukraine, and in equal measure to the Holy Innocents? And is God happy with any of these events in our passage? And I have to say no in capital letters. But also equally from the challenges, our passage we read that Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. And part of the challenge for me also is I couldn't help but look forward to Easter, in the sense that it could be said that the Herod of Jesus' crucifixion got his way, combined with the Sanhedrin and the Romans, and very much our faith is and will always be a balance of Holy Innocents news and the good news of Easter. And I need to ask myself and the congregation on Sunday, did or does God send suffering? And for me, I have to say, no, he does. He does allow it. I have to say yes, but it won't be the last word. And that for me helps me deal with the anger that I feel at this and what's going on in the world, that it won't be the last word. So
That's a huge help. And I think, clearly themes emerge here. Lisa, you have another go, because what do you find challenging personally?
I went in a different direction. So the challenge for me in this reading is around the notion of power and kingship. So Herod will not relinquish power. He will slaughter children rather than do that. And although I don't have a kingdom, I wonder how willing I am to let go of my autonomy, which is a form of power. And many of us in this day and age are resistant to any kind of authority. We live in a democracy where the king is nothing but a figurehead. Even in a church, we elect our bishop. Vicars are at least in part chosen by the church. We're not used to someone telling us what to do. We believe in self-determination. But of course, that's an illusion. And we are Christians and we are under authority. We are under the kingship of Jesus, a king who loves us, yes, a king who forgives us, yes. But I think part of our journey as Christians is about learning to hand over power. And that is very hard and very necessary.
Thanks, Lisa. And I just want to add one more thing. There's no historical record of the slaughter of the innocents, but I find it brilliant that one commentator, Eugene Boring, says, Herod was so evil, this would not have raised an eyebrow. That's a very chilling reflection on the world that Jesus was incarnated into. Well, I think we're all feeling a little bit sobered at this moment, so I'm going to go straight back and ask you, Craig, if we're going to find some good news here. You were hinting there might be some.
I think there is. I totally agree with what was said about the issue of power. Is that ultimately, for me, the good news would be that ultimately God will bring about justice. And that includes all victims, not only of the Holy Innocents, but last week we celebrated if you can call it a celebration, the 80th anniversary of the Holocaust. There's the Middle East ongoing situation. And I have to ask myself, is God happy at injustice? And I have to say no. And then for me, the good news is he won't just leave it as it is. Will Herod have faced justice ultimately? Yes, I think he will. And maybe a bit of a spoiler alert. Yes, Good Friday followed Holy Innocents, but was trumped, sorry for that, folks, by Easter. It has to be that God ultimately in eternity won't leave us in the mess of the Holy Innocents' injustice. He won't just leave us in that mire. And for me, I can never celebrate Easter without reflecting on Holy Innocents, without reflecting on Good Friday.
Thank you. And yeah, I'm seeing the ray of shining light in there, but we've got a long way to go, I think. So, Lisa, maybe a chink of light. Can you bring some more good news for us?
Yeah, it's a challenge, isn't it? But I decided that the good news comes in the shape of Joseph and the Magi. So the Magi are told in a dream not to return to Jerusalem, and they don't. They don't go west via Jerusalem. Joseph is told in a dream to flee to Egypt, and he follows that instruction. Imagine what that must have felt like for Joseph to go back to go to Egypt, of all places, with all the Jewish history associated with that. And yet he does it. He does as he's told. They are both models of what it looks like to live under authority. And what we learn from this is that the authority of God can be trusted. Why would we think that we are the best authority in our lives when the creator, the loving creator of the universe, is looking out for us? Doesn't it make sense to trust him? So the invitation here, I think, is to not be afraid, but to trust ourselves into his hands. I think it's possibly the best way to live.
Thanks. So yeah, I feel that growing light, but it's really hard, and it's determinant people who are opening that chink of light. Eddie, for you, where do you begin to see light?
For me, this whole thing is a great reading because it shows the dynamics of good and evil really well and how that kind of manifests in the world. And the thing is that the reason for what's happened is that it's been triggered by the birth of Christ. And so human power structures are extremely threatened by change and God's intervention of the world. And so it's easy for us to only see the darkness, but if there is sort of looming darkness in the world, it's a sign that something else is moving. And I thought of Lord of the Rings and one phrase I kind of thought of was a dragon isn't dangerous until you try and steal its gold. And this idea that this is actually a sign of something good coming. And Lord of the Rings has this really brilliantly, like, in Lord of the Rings, you've got this rising Mordor and these massive armies of men and elves, and they're all focused on that. But the thing to pay attention to is a hobbit in a ring, and no one can see it. And that's actually where the work is happening. So that's the good news, I thought.
That little ray of light, ray of hope, might be another noun that I'd use there. Craig, can I ask you then, let's not be all theoretical. So what?
So what for me, what could shape my life stories would be help me to cope with the difficult news stories that we see in the news, and coping with apparently unanswered prayer, which is another issue that we face as Christians. It reminded me of a question that we used to often ask at theological college: where is God in this mess? Where is God in this mess? And often that's you and I are God in this mess. And for me, also the so what is that when we do funerals, they're very much part, aren't they, of our ministry as a church. And often for me, it's important to help relatives cope with the trauma of loss or some of the things they come across by encouraging them to actually shout at God at their feelings of injustice. And for me, it's very important to share Christ's words from the cross, which were, my God, why have you forsaken me? So for me, the so what is acknowledging having permission to have a messy and a not happily ever after faith. And that very often, where is God in this mess, is you and I shouting at God the Father and allowing that to happen.
Well, it's not much use hiding our feelings from God, I suspect. So
Yes,
absolutely,
yes.
honesty with God. So Eddie, we're finding this light, it's breaking in, but so what?
When I read this reading, I actually thought, like, I didn't think it was a bad reading at all, because I thought it was actually very important for our particular moment right now. And, in the reading, we have a pretty drastic physical, human, political violence intervention in the world. And in the last 10 years or even more, we've also had this kind of shattering of our world and this division and sort of separating out into tribes and things like that. The temptation for Christians is to try and politicize that moment and say that God is on one side versus the other. God is against Trump, or God is for Trump, or God is for the Democrats or Labour, whatever it is. But actually, the most important thing for us is that the reason why this is happening is because something new is coming. And so we need to focus on that and actually not get sucked into this tribalism that's actually a phenomena of the change. And it's a very hard thing for us to do. So I guess, like, to go back to a Tolkien example, don't get caught in the wars of men and elves and orcs. Just support the ring bearer. That's all you need to do. So I thought it was a good reading.
Thank you, and Lisa, and particularly value, you opened with the sense of the strength or insignificance of weeping compared to the whole gut-wrenchingness of this passage. But so what?
I suppose I'm keeping with the theme that around giving up power. So if I was preaching on it, I actually found it difficult to find a so what here. But I think if I was preaching on this, I'd be inviting the congregation and myself, of course, to think about what is it that we won't relinquish. So Herod was clutching onto a kingdom, but what are we clutching to ourselves and won't let go of? It might be our routine, it might be our influence over our children or our independence or money, or and we can do some thinking about that ourselves. Self-reflection is always good. But then I'd suggest we pray that, God is gentle and good, but he is also the king. And an honest prayer would be to ask God, what is it you need me to let go of? And then help me let go of it, because it is hard. It's an invitation to trust, to live a truly countercultural way under the authority of the true king. And it will take us a lifetime, I think, to get to that level of letting all that we think we own, letting it go into God's hands. It is very hard to get from mine to thine. But I think we only need to be willing, and he will show us the way.
Thank you so much for that, and all three of you. Not a bundle of laughs, but we're finding God in the midst, as we always will. Thanks for helping me break open a really difficult passage.